respond immediately to what we just heard. Donald Trump was, by Jeffrey Epstein's own account, Jeffrey Epstein's closest friend for more than a decade. I'm happy to yield to the gentle lady from Wyoming if she chooses to deny that or has some evidence to rebuff that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, you don't accept any of the photographic?
No evidence of that whatsoever.
Have you ever seen a photograph of Jeffrey?
Who was your
I'm
attorney?
reclaiming my time, Ms. Hagman. Reclaiming my time, Ms. Hagman.
Who was Epstein's attorney?
I'm reclaiming my time.
The committee will come to order.
I'm very happy.
Mr. Raskin controls the time. Mr. Raskin.
There are tons of photographs of Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump, which the gentlelady apparently chooses not to see with her own eyes. There's lots of video.
What's the last date of
There's
what?
lots of video evidence of it. They were best friends for more than a decade. Okay? You will find a lot of stuff out. If you are hinging your case on the idea that Donald Trump didn't know Jeffrey Epstein, you are in for a very serious public collapse.
All right. Before we dive in, you need to see how wildly off the rails this hearing gets. Because this isn't calm debate. This isn't routine oversight. This is a full-blown collision. And the moment that collision detonates is when Jamie Raskin turns directly toward Harriet Hageman and essentially says, if you're building your entire argument on Donald Trump not knowing Jeffrey Epstein, you're headed for a meltdown on live television. That one line, that sudden shift in tone, is where the temperature in the room spikes. You can practically feel the air tighten. Raskin isn't politely disagreeing. He's detonating the foundation of Hageman's pushback with a single sentence. And what makes this hearing so explosive is that it didn't start at that level. It built toward it. It simmered. It snapped. And then, it never cooled off again. So let's break down exactly how we got from routine amendments to a genuine political firefight, and why this exchange is already being clipped, replayed, and blasted across political Twitter. Here's the context. The hearing starts on a completely different track. A committee member laying out the scope of NCAA athletes, the absurdity of obsessing over a tiny handful of cases, and the hypocrisy of acting like transgender athletes pose some existential threat while ignoring actual, documented predators who operated for years under institutional cover. It's already tense. It's already charged. But the temperature is still at a simmer. And then, the second Epstein's name enters the conversation, it triggers a seismic shift. Suddenly, this isn't about sports policy anymore. It's about credibility, power, hypocrisy, and the political cost of pretending not to see what's been documented for decades. From there, the fight becomes inevitable. So watch the foundation of the meltdown, the moment that sets the stage for the eruption you saw in the cold open. It begins long before Raskin ever says the word collapse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to support my colleague's amendment. I want to actually also support my colleague from North Carolina, her amendment as well, and I associate myself with both of their remarks. Both of you from Vermont and North Carolina. Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk about privacy and protection and safety. For the record, I do want to protect our athletes. I want to protect our boy athletes. I want to protect our girl athletes. I want to protect our girls. The president of the NCAA, and I know this was shared earlier, did tell Congress that there are less than 10, and not all of them are transgender women. There are less than 10 of the more than 500,000 NCAA athletes that this bill and these kinds of bills would be targeting. That is a small number. That is a small number to be using up so much of this committee's time when there are legitimate issues that are actually impacting someone's livelihood and their ability to be alive and to live safely. If we are going to talk about keeping predators out of our sports, I mean, the biggest predator is the NCAA mafia that is so focused on the bodies of our athletes and making revenue. getting more and more money. Scholarship's not a priority, their mental health isn't a priority, their physical health isn't a priority. Why don't we talk about how to rein that entity in? But we don't. We don't. Why don't we talk about, yes, the pedophiles who have preyed on our young athletes, our boy athletes and our girl athletes? Larry Nassar was a name that was brought up. Where is the horror and outrage and shock over what that individual did? At one point, we were debating a bill where adults would be responsible for checking the genitalia of young kids, like to make a determination of who was a boy or who was a girl. And I'm sorry, no one here who is a parent or is a godparent or an uncle or an aunt to a child would be okay hearing some story of some rando who's now been authorized to check the genitalia of their child because they just want to make sure of something. Get out of here. Get out of here. Go straight to jail. And if you're talking about, well, the women are the victims, the girls are the victims, let's fight for them. Yeah, okay. There's a list of young girls in those Epstein files. There is a young child, a minor, okay, in her journal, documentation of exploitation, sexual abuse, rape, and forced abortion, a survivor of Epstein. We're not talking about her. In this latest tranche, not the full release of the files. An 11 or 12 or 13-year-old girl, naked, tied up, spread with her legs open, on a man's knee, being burned with a magnifying glass. No one is sharing any outrage over that. I see your face. Exactly. That was my face too. Disgusting, egregious, horrific, a child. If that was your child, and you have a DOJ that is putting the names of these women out there to be attacked and abused and vilified, and no one has any outrage, but you're going to go up in arms and have all this drama about a transgender person. Most people, real talk, have never even met a transgender person. It's like a boogeyman. Like, talk about fight for these girls that are in these files that were abused, burned up, raped.
What you just watched is the buildup, but don't underestimate it. This wasn't filler. This wasn't background noise. This was the fuse. Notice what's happening. The first speaker methodically dismantles the committee's obsession with transgender athletes by pointing out the sheer math. Less than 10 of more than 500,000 INSA athletes fall into the category being targeted by these bills. Less than 10. She's highlighting just how intentionally inflated this issue has become. How much political energy is being poured into something statistically microscopic while genuine, systemic threats to athlete safety go essentially unaddressed. But she doesn't stop with the data. She pivots hard into the real predators, the real failures, the real cover-ups. She brings up the NCAA's long history of neglecting athlete safety, the Larry Nassar scandal. And then she hits the room with the Epstein files, not as a political cheap shot, but as a contrast. If you're so passionate about protecting girls, why is the outrage selective? And you can feel the committee shift. This isn't polite framing. This is a direct confrontation with the hypocrisy of pretending trans athletes pose the real threat while actual abusers operated with decades of impunity. She forces the room to sit with the uncomfortable truths, the exploitation, the minors, the documented horrors. And she does it without theatrics. She lays out facts the committee has chosen, repeatedly, not to prioritize. And that's what rattles the other side, because the moment Epstein is mentioned, the conversation stops being theoretical and starts being about accountability, not abstract safety. Real names, real failures, real protection of powerful men. And that's why Hageman jumps in. That's why she tries to shove the conversation back into the simpler world of men in women's sports. Because the alternative, it means walking into a minefield she does not want to step on. When Hageman takes the mic, listen to what she does. She doesn't address the systemic issues raised. She doesn't touch the cases of exploitation. She doesn't respond to the content of the argument. Instead, she throws out a deflection grenade, trying to plant the idea that the real person who protected Epstein wasn't a list of powerful men, wasn't an international network, but one House Democrat. This is where things start to unravel. Because when you deflect from the systemic to the personal, especially on something as well documented as Epstein's circles, you'd better be ready for someone to call your bluff. And Raskin? He does not ease into it. He goes straight for the contradiction, and he does it with surgical precision. But before we get there, pay attention to how Hageman frames herself. She positions her claim not as speculation, not as opinion, but as fact, repeatedly calling the Democrat in question Epstein's fixer. That's not a small claim. That's not a cautious claim. She presents it as an established truth. And that right there is what opens the door for what comes next. Because when you make a claim that bold and the record doesn't support it the way you're presenting it, you invite the kind of pushback that can crack a hearing wide open. And Raskin takes that invitation. He takes it, he widens it, and he turns it into the most explosive moment of the entire day. Everything you've seen so far, that was the escalation. Now comes the collision. Watch how fast the temperature jumps from disagreement to eruption.
Gentlelady yields back. Further discussion. Mr. Raskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I rise in support of the gentlelady's amendment. Let me just respond immediately to what we just heard. Donald Trump was, by Jeffrey Epstein's own account, Jeffrey Epstein's closest friend for more than a decade. I'm happy to yield to the gentle lady from Wyoming if she chooses to deny that or has some evidence to rebuff that.
Absolutely.
Oh, you don't accept any of the photographic?
No evidence of that whatsoever.
Have you ever seen a photograph of Jeffrey?
Who was your
I'm
attorney?
reclaiming my time,
Who was
Ms. Hagman.
Epstein's attorney?
Reclaiming my time, Ms. Hagman.
Who was Epstein's attorney?
I'm reclaiming my time.
The committee will come to order.
I'm very happy.
Mr. Raskin controls the time. Mr. Raskin.
There are tons of photographs of Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump, which the gentlelady apparently chooses not to see with her own eyes. There's lots of video.
What's the last date of
There's
what?
lots of video evidence of it. They were best friends for more than a decade. Okay? You will find a lot of stuff out. If you are hinging your case on the idea that Donald Trump didn't know Jeffrey Epstein, you are in for a very serious public collapse if that's your argument. As this comes
That
forward,
wasn't my
you
argument.
cannot compare.
My argument is about Stacey Plaskett.
Excuse me, I'd like my time restored, okay?
The committee will be in order. Mr. Raskin controls the time, and he has not yielded. Mr. Raskin.
Stacey Plaskett is barely a comma in the encyclopedia of Donald Trump's complicity and involvement with Jeffrey Epstein and his international human sex trafficking ring. Okay, and if you don't understand that and you don't believe it, then you've not done anything to familiarize yourself with the evidence, Ms. Hageman. I'm sorry. And I know that your predecessor in office, Ms. Cheney, would have done that. She was scrupulous and she was studious and she took the facts seriously and she was not an ideologue who just fell for a cult leader. Okay? Now, back to the matter at hand. Presently, the Olympic Committee has already made the decision, I think, in more than half of the sports. So it's already decided, for example, that with respect to boxing, with respect to rugby, with respect to swimming, with respect to tennis, and with respect to volleyball, as I understand it, that all of these are limited to the sex assigned at birth. That's already been decided. So we are intervening now as the United States Congress to make a decision about a miscellaneous category of a handful of other sports, which have not even been mentioned by our colleagues, which appear to still be open to transgender athletes. Here are the ones that I see them are skateboarding, skiing and snowboarding, table tennis, ping pong, and then ultimate frisbee. Now, perhaps someone over there can explain why, when American citizens are being shot in the face by federal agents and the entire heartland of the country is in an uproar because of Donald Trump's private paramilitary army that nobody on the other side seems to want to talk about, we should be talking about whether or not transgender girls or women should be able to participate in ultimate frisbee competitions. Because that's really what we're talking about today. But they sure would much rather be talking about that than anything else. They don't want to talk about what's really in the Epstein files. I'm surprised, I'm stunned, I'm astonished, I'm flabbergasted by Ms. Hageman, who seems to go way beyond anything else I've heard from other Republicans. She seems to be in open denial that Donald Trump and Melania Trump had anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein. That's astonishing to me. I think she's setting herself for a huge public relations fall by going that far. Oh, here's some photographs, Ms. Hageman. How do you see about those? Do you think those are created by artificial intelligence? You got any problem with any of those pictures of your hero with Jeffrey Epstein, his closest friend for more than a decade? Thank you for bringing forth the photographic evidence. Keep that up for a while. Apparently some people haven't seen those pictures. They're very happy to talk about Stacey Plaskett, the non-voting delegate from the Virgin Islands, or Bill Clinton. And anybody who was involved in any crime should be punished for it, whether they're Democrat, Republican, Independent. I'll say it right now. Will Ms. Hageman, the very distinguished gentle lady from Wyoming, say that? Will she say that Republicans should be punished for their crimes if they were complicit in a billion-dollar international child sex trafficking ring? I don't think so. I don't think she'll say it, not if it's Donald Trump. It's all about Donald Trump following him.
This is where the hearing stops being a discussion and becomes a showdown. The moment Raskin takes the mic, the entire dynamic shifts. He doesn't circle around the argument. He doesn't slowly build toward the contradiction. He goes straight for the weakest link in Hageman's claim. The idea that Trump, the figure she consistently defends, somehow had no meaningful connection to Epstein. He cuts directly into it by citing Epstein's own words, that Trump was, at one point, his closest friend for more than a decade. Immediately, Hageman tries to interrupt, and that tells you everything. People interrupt when they lose control of the frame. People interrupt when the ground under their argument starts giving way. But Raskin refuses to yield. He cites photographs. He cites video. He cites years of documented proximity between Trump and Epstein. And every time Hageman tries to claw back control, he repeats the same grounding, "I reclaim my time." That's not just procedural, it's rhetorical dominance. Then comes the line that hit the internet within minutes. If you are hinging your case on the idea that Donald Trump didn't know Jeffrey Epstein, you are in for a very serious public collapse. That moment lands because it exposes the fragility of Hageman's entire argument. She tried to deflect from systemic abuse by pinning everything on a single Democrat, but Raskin reminds the room that Epstein's circle wasn't partisan. And more importantly, he reminds Hageman that pretending Trump wasn't in that circle is not just inaccurate, it's indefensible. But look at what happens next. Hageman backpedals. Hard. She insists no one claimed Trump didn't know Epstein, even though she had just tried to minimize his connection by shifting the focus to someone else entirely. That's what losing the narrative looks like. That's what getting cornered looks like. When the contradiction hits, the goalposts start moving. Then, Raskin raises the stakes even further, holding up photographs, asking whether she thinks they're AI generated. And he doesn't stop there. He challenges her to say, out loud, that Republicans complicit in Epstein's trafficking network should be punished. She will not say it. He calls that out too. And that moment lands because it's not about Trump anymore. It's about selective outrage. From there, the committee starts spiraling. Multiple members object. The chairman has to intervene repeatedly. Someone snorts into the microphone. People are talking over each other. Raskin's accusation that Hageman's story falls apart under basic scrutiny hits a nerve, and suddenly the room is pure chaos. This is what a hearing looks like when one side loses control of the frame and tries frantically to reclaim it. And the more they scramble, the more obvious it becomes who has the momentum. Hagingman tries to reframe her argument again at the end, insisting her point was never about Trump, even though her initial comments were clearly designed to shift attention from systemic abuse to one Democrat. That's not clarification. That's cleanup. When someone has to explain what they really meant, it's already slipping away. And Raskin, he doesn't need to reframe anything. He doesn't need to walk anything back. He delivered his argument clean, sharp, documented, and impossible to sidestep. That's the difference between reacting and controlling. Raskin controlled the exchange. Hagman reacted to it. And the contrast could not be clearer. If you watch the room, you can actually see when the momentum flips. It's the second Raskin notes that his predecessor, Liz Cheney, would have taken the evidence seriously, studied it, and not adopted a cult-like defensiveness. That comparison cuts deep precisely because it names what's happening without saying it outright. Hagman's defense of Trump isn't about evidence. It's about allegiance. And once that's exposed, there's no unexposing it. The final minutes reveal just how much damage had been done. Hagman tries to recenter the narrative on her original talking point that one Democrat's name appears in the files. But at that point, the committee has already seen the contrast. One side presented data, cases, evidence, photographs. The other presented a deflection and then ran from the implications. By the time she says that was the point has already been lost. This hearing wasn't about ultimate frisbee or snowboarding or INSA scholarship structures. It was about what happens when someone introduces real evidence into a space built on political talking points, and the talking points crumble. And whether you like Raskin or not, the truth is simple. He came into this moment prepared. Hagman didn't, and the footage does not lie. This wasn't a debate. It was an exposure. And the side that walked into it unprepared paid the price. If you want more breakdowns like this where powerful people get pressed on the record, hit subscribe and drop your take in the comments. Who do you think came out stronger in this hearing? And what was the one moment that changed the whole exchange?